Hello, my name is Jonas Butler, and I'm a practicing master's level clinical therapist. And I want to take the time tonight to make this video to talk about a really compelling topic in modern psychology known as the placebo effect. Now make sure to buckle up and lock in because this video will cure your depression and boredom and has been proven to make you smarter and give you more control of your own life. So first off, what is the placebo effect? Well, the origin of the term placebo actually refers to a Latin phrase literally translated to mean I shall please. But in the current century, psychologists and researchers alike use it to refer to the very real effects that an inert substance gives you in controlled trials and in your natural environment. Now, I use the words modern psychology here deliberately because what I'm going to be mostly referring to is the practical applications in contemporary history of the placebo effect, as well as, again, contemporary studies. But in a book titled The Cure Within, A History of Mind-Body Medicine by Anne Harrington, which by the way is an excellent piece of work, we're given a story which delineates the process of how the 18th century theory of mesmerism, also known as animal magnetism, set the pretext for hypnosis. The practice of hypnosis later revealed credible scientific revelations, including the idea of suggestion as a neutral clinical variable. Placebos have since become a staple of scientifically rigorous studies in medicine and other trials, as the practice of testing the effectiveness of a given treatment is now often paired together with placebo trials, and in some cases it's even mandatory. Okay, so as you can see, there's a long history that gives the placebo effect its scientific and theoretical pretext, and this helps solidify justification for its use in research trials and in studies. But there's still a question yet to be answered, which is what makes this so compelling? Well, what would you think if I told you if people were going into the hospital with broken backs and walking out the same day just because they expected that they would be treated and get better? This is what two empirical peer-reviewed studies found that were published in the New England Journal of Medicine. In these experiments, participants would go in with spinal compression fractures with the expectation they were getting vertebroplasties for said injuries. And to put it succinctly, a vertebroplasty is essentially when a doctor injects medical-grade cement into the injured vertebrae to increase mobility and reduce pain. But in these experiments, subjects in the placebo group instead had pressure applied to stimulate needle insertion after being injected with a local anesthetic that affected only the skin. This and other conditions present in the room, such as cement being mixed so that participants could smell it, perfectly mimicked the procedure. Now really think about this for a minute. People are walking into the hospitals with broken backs because of either trauma or some condition like osteoporosis, and what they're getting when they get there is a local anesthetic and a massage, and they're walking out basically the same day that they get it. Now this is a pretty incredible thing to you and I at least, but to the researchers, it's something that shows that the vertebroplasties themselves are not totally valid, you could say. In modern science, especially in the medical field, researchers have a penchant for focusing on the specificity of their intended targets and summarizing all aberrations from hypotheses that lead to placebo effects as confounds, which either contaminate the focus of the study or have some issue with the way the study was developed. For example, in the conclusion of these studies, the researchers wrote that they found no significant difference in outcomes between the vertebroplasties or the sham experiments. And that really is representative of the larger attitude in the medical and scientific community around placebos, because this larger dynamic where people expect these outcomes, they still happen. And it does show a real lack of curiosity when the principal focus of any of these placebo trials is whether or not it's significantly different from the actual treatment they're studying. Because if people are still getting a benefit from the treatment and the placebos, and there's not a significant difference, then that still means that there's something there. But before I get into the practical applications of the placebo effect and painting a bigger picture for what it all means, first we have to talk about what the upper limits of it are. So, what can the placebo effect not do? If you look into the aforementioned studies, you would find that people's backs weren't spontaneously healing, but rather what they noticed was that they were able to get out of the hospital in spite of that. And while that's very powerful and has utility, which I'll explain later, it shows that the placebo effect itself cannot actually heal us in those types of ways. For instance, if you have a condition such as cancer, then an inert treatment, which you believe to be chemotherapy, or some other effective intervention won't get rid of your tumors. On the contrary, if you were to believe that these inert treatments were actually helping to get rid of your tumors, you might actually feel better about yourself and your health, but the psychosomatic effect wouldn't carry itself long term for your physical health outcomes. Now, with all that being said, There is a gray zone in between structural damage reversal from something like cancer or other conditions and purely subjective psychosomatic reports. Empirical scientific studies have demonstrated over multiple experiments that immune modulation is highly reactive to the placebo effect, with physiological markers such as inflammation and cytokine production being affected by our expectations, as well as hormonal outputs. Antibody production may even be affected by the placebo effect, which could have serious implications for modern medicine, but we need to gather more data before we can make any kind of serious claims on what that might mean or look like. Now, the last thing I'll mention in this section actually is the antithesis of the placebo effect, known as the nocebo effect, which can be defined by the negative effect on our physical health caused purely by psychological and psychosomatic factors, which, like the placebo effect, can occur during medical intervention, whether or not it's inert. Now, this phenomenon has been studied less than the placebo effect because of, ethics concerns, as well as researchers deliberately incorporating the placebo effect into contemporary research. But it's not something that you want to underestimate because there are very real consequences based on the way that you frame things. And this perfectly sets us up for the next section, which will be focused on the applicability of this effect. Your brain can be tricked into making you faster or slower than you normally would be at baseline. Now, one of the reasons this happens is through an unconscious psychological phenomenon known as priming, which essentially just refers to one stimulus unconsciously influencing the response of another. This has been spelled out in dynamics such as the ideomotor effect and the Florida effect, two types of associative priming which cause us to move faster or slower, respectively. In the study Automaticity of Social Behavior, Direct Effects of Trait Construct and Stereotype Activation on Action, researchers had participants assemble scrambled sentences that had words like Florida, forgetful, bald, gray, or wrinkled together. Their speed was later recorded when walking down a hallway within the same building at a noticeably slower pace than others who had assembled different words together to make a sentence. Okay, so at this point you might be asking yourself, why is this guy talking about priming effect this, and ideomotor and Florida effect that in his placebo video? Well, it's because these effects are categorically similar in the way they affect our psychosomatic perceptions. And these dynamics can be deliberately harnessed to increase both cognitive performance and physical performance, as well as decrease emotional and physical distress. So yes, while these effects are all different, they can still technically be grouped together under this umbrella category of intangible effects. But the placebo effect is one of the best known ways that we can really deliberately and conscientiously bring this into our own sphere of influence. Specifically, it provides a model for being able to increase the effectiveness of treatments we are using on a wide range of personal features that can be psychological or physical. Additionally, it can help in managing problematic symptoms of mental or physical ailments, reduce dependency on medications, and give us a platform to help understand the mind and body connection intuitively and intellectually. To put it succinctly, the more you learn about the placebo effect, and the more you learn about its neurological and psychosomatic impact on your body, the more effective it will be. For example, IV placebo injections and sham medical devices have been consistently demonstrated to produce a stronger effect on psychosomatic symptoms than fake tablets or sugar capsules. Now, the conditioning and context behind this is important because the experiences you've had will go on to shape the way that you feel about those interventions. But the most important part about this is the expectation bias, because that is the key for giving yourself the edge. Now, I'd implore you not to underestimate this effect, because there are real, tangible, objective, and measurable effects that take place from this on the neurological and psychosomatic level. In a landmark study, participants were told they were receiving a pain-reducing cream when in reality they were getting a placebo. Researchers then applied painful heat while measuring brain activity with fMRI scans. These scans showed reduced activity in pain processing regions, including the thalamus, insula, and anterior cingulate cortex, as well as increased activity in the prefrontal cortex during anticipation, which is involved in executive functions, including expectations. Okay, so now that we've got the technicalities out of the way, let's take this a step further to try and develop a model which you can apply to your own life. Now, as I talked about in a previous video, the CBT triangle does a great job of delineating the interaction between emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. And it can be perfectly mapped onto this dynamic because we can deliberately think about having expectations, and then the emotional reaction and behaviors will flow naturally from there. So step 1 in this model would look something like expect more from yourself, others, and or your environment. I'll also mention as a side note that if you have an illness or you need to take medication for any other reason, that learning about it might actually improve your chances to get a heightened effect from said medication or other intervention. And that perfectly flows into the next step, which is learning more about the thing that you're trying to change. Now, learning in this model serves two purposes. The first one is that you need a basis of understanding for the placebo effect to actually take place. And the second one is that with that basis, you can have more expectations on an array of features emanating from your newfound knowledge. If we use vertebroplasties as an example of this, then we can see that knowing more about it can help you to know how long it will take for the effects to take place, how long they'll last for, what the prognoses are, and maybe how many times you have to go back in for treatment. And knowing those things can help you refine your expectations and help shape what the outcome is most likely to be. And as we discussed previously, you can make conscientious efforts to deliberately control this dynamic. Okay, so the third part of this model is pretty straightforward and can be summarized essentially as avoiding bad predictions. Now, that can be pretty simple when it comes to abstaining from phrases like, I hate doing this, or this is gonna suck so bad. But it's more difficult to control when it comes to beliefs. If, for instance, your goal is to pass an exam, but you genuinely believe that it's impossible, then it will be harder for you to do both the requisite preparation for it, such as studying, and your perception of the test at the time of taking it will appear harder. Now, step 1 in this model alleviates that to some extent, but this is altogether different and still needs to be attended to separately in order to really reach your maximum potential. Additionally, in the case of those of us who need to take medication or some other type of physiological intervention, then avoiding the nocebo effect can be included as a subset of this rule. Now, the final part of this working model will be to surround yourself with the necessary information you need to be able to succeed. In other words, put yourself in an environment that promotes your goals. This also means avoid inundating yourself with negativity, which can promote a nocebo effect. Now, you can get pretty creative with this part, because you can use imagery, for instance, to set up posters in your house or change your phone screen or anything of the like, in order to promote that unconscious movement toward your goal. And the same can be said by practicing what you want on the physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual level. So what has this video given you? Well, you've learned about the placebo effect and some other intangible effects, and you've been provided a basic model to map onto your own life so that you can accomplish your goals. But as is the case with any other personal venture or pursuit, it's up to you to be able to figure out how to map this onto your own life and apply it to the things that you want to achieve. But if you have any further questions, please feel free to comment below, and I'll be sure to respond to each and every one of you. But I would implore you all to go out and search more, learn more, and be able to understand these dynamics so that you can carve your own path.